The stock market ticker for Verify Air usually moved like a sloth, steady, boring, predictable. But at 9:02 a.m. on a Tuesday, it didn't just move, it vanished. It dropped so fast the trading algorithms halted the board. Why? Because 12 hours earlier, a flight attendant on Flight 402 decided that the quiet black man in a hoodie in seat 3A didn't look like he belonged in first class. She thought she was clearing a seat for a commuting pilot. She didn't realize she was physically dragging off Ronald Thorne, the man whose company owned the cloud infrastructure that kept their entire airline's navigation systems online. They wanted his seat. He took their entire market cap. Ronald Thorne adjusted the noise-cancelling headphones over his ears, but they couldn't drown out the frantic energy of O'Hare International Airport on a rainy Monday night. He wasn't supposed to be here. By all rights, Ronald should have been on his Gulfstream G650, sipping sparkling water at 45,000 feet, reviewing the quarterly projections for Vertex systems. But the GX50 was grounded in Teterboro with a hydraulic leak, and his mother in Atlanta had called. Her voice had been thin, brittle. "It's your father, Jules. It's time." When your mother says that, you don't wait for private jets to be fixed. You buy the first ticket available. That ticket was on Aerovantage Airlines, Flight 402 to Atlanta, first class, seat 3A. Ronald looked down at his attire. He had rushed out of his coding den in his penthouse. He was wearing a faded grey hoodie from his alma mater, MIT, dark sweatpants, and a pair of beat-up sneakers. He hadn't shaved in 2 days. To the untrained eye, he looked like a tired graduate student, or perhaps a musician down on his luck. To the trained eye, the vintage Patek Philippe watch peeking out from his sleeve was worth more than the entire row of seats he was sitting in. But nobody on Flight 402 had trained eyes. "Excuse me, sir." A voice cut through his music. Ronald slid his headphones down. A flight attendant stood over him. Her name tag read Becky. Her smile was tight, plastered on with a precision that didn't reach her eyes. She was holding a tablet like a shield. "Yes?" Ronald's voice was deep, calm, the voice of a man who managed 3,000 employees and billions in assets. "May I see your boarding pass again?" Ronald sighed, pulling his phone from his pocket and flashing the QR code. "Is there a problem? I'm already seated." Becky scanned it, her eyes narrowing as the machine beeped a confirmation. She seemed disappointed. "Right. Mr. Thorne, we're just doing a final head count. The flight is extremely overbooked." "Okay," Ronald said, sliding his headphones back up. He just wanted to close his eyes. He needed to prepare himself for what waited in Atlanta. The grief was already a heavy stone in his chest. 10 minutes passed. The plane was fully boarded. The air was stale, smelling of recycled coffee and damp coats. The cabin door was still open. Ronald watched the frantic activity at the front of the plane. The gate agent, a man named Greg with a tie that was too short, was whispering aggressively to Becky. They both looked at the manifest. Then they both looked at seat 3A. Ronald felt a prickle of irritation. He knew that look. He had seen that look in boardrooms before he bought the companies that refused to hire him. He had seen it in high-end jewelry stores where security guards trailed him until he flashed a black card. It was the look of assessment, and he knew he had been assessed and found wanting. Greg, the gate agent, marched down the aisle. He didn't stop at the empty seat in 2B. He stopped at 3A. "Mr. Thorne," Greg said. It wasn't a question. "We have a situation. We have a senior pilot who needs to deadhead to Atlanta to fly a connection tomorrow morning. We're going to need your seat." Ronald blinked. "Excuse me." "We need your seat," Greg repeated, louder this time, performing for the audience of the cabin. The flight is full. We've asked for volunteers. Nobody stepped up. So, per airline policy, we are selecting passengers to be rebooked." "You're selecting me," Ronald said, his voice dropping an octave. "Why?" "It's a computer algorithm, sir. Random selection," Greg lied. Ronald knew it was a lie because Ronald wrote algorithms for a living. Random selection didn't pick the highest-paying ticket holder in first class unless the variables were manually overridden. "I paid full fare for this seat 2 hours ago," Ronald said calmly. "I have a family emergency in Atlanta. I am not getting off this plane." "Sir, it's not a request," Becky chimed in, stepping closer. The dynamic had shifted. They were a pack now. "If you don't leave voluntarily, we'll have to count it as non-compliance." "There are 3 other people in first class," Ronald noted, looking around. "Did you ask them?" To his right, a man in a crisp suit, who Ronald recognized as a mid-level marketing VP for a soda company, pretended to read his magazine. Behind him, a young influencer couple was live-streaming the argument, phones held high. "We asked you," Greg snapped. "Look, buddy, don't make this hard. Grab your bag and let's go. We have a pilot who needs to get to work. His job is important." The implication hung in the air like smoke. His job is important. Yours, hoodie-wearing man, is not. Ronald unbuckled his seatbelt, but not to stand up. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "My name is Ronald Thorne. I strongly suggest you check your manifest again, or perhaps Google that name, before you take this step. I am telling you, I am not moving." Greg laughed, a short bark of a laugh. "I don't care if you're the King of England. This is my aircraft until the doors close. You are disrupting this flight." "I'm sitting quietly," Ronald corrected. "You are disrupting me." Greg turned to Becky. "Call Chicago PD. Tell them we have a trespasser." The atmosphere in the cabin shifted from annoyance to electricity. Phones were out everywhere now. The red recording dots were like little eyes in the darkness of the cabin. Ronald remained seated. His heart rate hadn't spiked. He checked his watch. 8:15 p.m. If they delayed much longer, he would miss the window to see his father tonight. That thought sent a spike of adrenaline through him that had nothing to do with the gate agent. "Sir," a new voice entered the fray. It was the captain stepping out of the cockpit. Captain Miller. He looked exhausted and impatient. "I've got a slot time to hit. If we miss it, we're sitting on the tarmac for 2 hours. Get off my plane." "I have a ticket," Ronald said, his patience thinning. "I have a right to be here." "The contract of carriage says we can remove you for any reason," Greg said smugly. "Right now, the reason is you're belligerent." "I haven't raised my voice," Ronald pointed out. "I haven't used profanity. I simply refuse to give up a service I paid for." "That's insubordination," Becky said. 2 officers from aviation security appeared at the bulkhead. They weren't real police, but they had badges, and they had the bulk. One was named Officer Kowalski, a man whose neck seemed wider than his head. The other was Officer Miller, no relation to the captain, presumably, who looked nervous. "This the guy?" Kowalski asked, gesturing to Ronald like he was a bag of trash. "That's him," Greg said. "Refuses to deplane." Kowalski leaned in, invading Ronald's personal space. The smell of stale tobacco was overwhelming. "All right, pal. Let's go. Don't make us drag you." Ronald looked at the officer. He thought about his father in the hospital bed. He thought about the dignity his father had fought for his whole life, working 2 jobs so Ronald could go to math camp, then MIT. He thought about the indignity of being treated like a criminal in a space he could afford to buy 10 times over. "I am not leaving," Ronald said, looking Kowalski in the eye. "If you touch me, you are violating my civil rights, and you will regret it. Not today, maybe, but you will regret it." "Is that a threat?" Kowalski barked. "It's a statement of fact." Kowalski didn't like facts. He grabbed Ronald's arm. "Don't touch me!" Ronald shouted, pulling his arm back. That was the trigger. "He's resisting!" Greg yelled, stepping back to let the muscle do the work. Kowalski lunged. He grabbed Ronald by the collar of his hoodie and yanked. Ronald's seatbelt was still fastened, so the force slammed his head back against the headrest. The sound of the impact, a sickening thud, echoed through the silent first-class cabin. "Oh my God!" a woman in row 4 screamed. "Hey, stop it!" the marketing VP finally yelled, dropping his magazine. "He didn't do anything!" But it was too late. The adrenaline of violence had taken over. Kowalski and Miller were on him. They struggled to unbuckle the seatbelt, their elbows flying. One of them struck Ronald in the mouth. He tasted copper. Ronald didn't fight back physically. He knew better. He went limp. It was a strategy of non-violent resistance he'd read about, but it also made him dead weight. Finally, the buckle clicked open. Kowalski grabbed Ronald's ankles. Miller grabbed his wrists. They lifted him out of the seat like a sack of meal. "This is insane!" someone from economy shouted. "He's bleeding!" Ronald was indeed bleeding. His lip had split. A drop of blood landed on the pristine beige leather of the first-class armrest. They dragged him. They didn't walk him out. They dragged him down the short aisle of first class. Ronald's hoodie rode up, exposing his stomach. His sneakers squeaked against the carpet. He locked eyes with the captain, who was watching with arms crossed, checking his watch. "Remember this face," Ronald told himself, his vision blurring slightly from the blow to his head. Remember every single one of these faces. As they reached the jet bridge, Greg, the gate agent, smirked. "Should have just listened, buddy. Now you're going to jail." They hauled him up the jet bridge, the cold Chicago air hitting his face. They threw him onto the hard industrial carpet of the terminal floor. Kowalski put a knee in Ronald's back. "Stay down." Ronald lay there, his cheek pressed against the dirty carpet. He could see the passengers in the terminal window staring at him. He could feel the vibration of his phone in his pocket. It was probably his mother again. He closed his eyes. The humiliation was a hot, searing poison in his veins. But as the shock began to fade, something else replaced it. Cold, mathematical precision. They saw a thug. They saw a problem. They didn't know they had just assaulted the man who held the keys to their digital kingdom. "Get him up," Kowalski grunted. "Let's take him to the holding cell. The airline wants to press charges for trespassing." Ronald stood up, his hands cuffed behind his back. He spat a mouthful of blood onto the floor. "Can I have my phone?" Ronald asked quietly. "I need to make a call." "You can make a call from the station," Kowalski laughed. "No," Ronald said. "I need to make it now. Unless you want to explain to the governor why Ronald Thorne is missing." The name meant nothing to Kowalski, but the tone did. It was the tone of a man who wasn't afraid of the police, because he owned the people who owned the police. They walked him away. The plane door closed. Flight 402 pushed back. 20 minutes late. The captain apologized over the intercom for the unruly passenger delay. The passengers settled in, but on Twitter, the first video was already uploading. It was titled, "Aerovantage Beats Up Innocent Man." It had 0 views. 5 minutes later, it had 10. By the time Ronald reached the holding cell, it had 50,000, and Ronald Thorne was about to make his one phone call. The holding cell at O'Hare smelled of ammonia and despair. It was a 10x10 box, with a steel bench bolted to the floor and a flickering fluorescent light that buzzed like a trapped fly. Ronald sat on the bench, dabbing his split lip with a rough paper towel Officer Miller had sheepishly handed him. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a throbbing headache. Officer Kowalski was filling out paperwork at a small desk outside the bars, typing with 2 fingers. Aggravated trespass, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, he muttered, savoring each charge. Officer Miller, the younger one, was leaning against the wall, scrolling through his phone. His face had gone pale. He looked up at Ronald, then back at his phone, then at Ronald again. "Hey, Kowalski," Miller whispered. "You might want to see this." "Not now," Kowalski grunted. "No, seriously. The video, it's at 2 million views." Kowalski stopped typing. "What?" "The influencer couple in 4B. They live-streamed the whole thing. Twitter is melting down. Zagor boycott AeroVantage is trending #1 globally." Miller swallowed hard. "And people are IDing him." Kowalski spun his chair around and glared at Ronald. "IDing him? Who is he? Some rapper?" Ronald stood up and walked to the bars. His demeanor had shifted. The tired traveler was gone. The predator was back. "I am Ronald Thorne," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the small room. "Founder and CEO of Vertex Systems. Do you know what Vertex does, Officer Kowalski?" Kowalski stared. The name sounded vaguely familiar, like something he'd seen on a billboard or the news, but he couldn't place it. "We provide the cloud architecture for 80% of the Fortune 500, Ronald continued, his voice terrifyingly level, including the biometric security systems used by the TSA, and most importantly, the logistics and navigation mainframe for AeroVantage Airlines. Silence descended on the room. The buzz of the light seemed to get louder. "I need my phone," Ronald said. "Now." "You get a call when we book you," Kowalski said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. He looked at Miller, who was shaking his head, "Give it to him," with wide eyes. "If I don't make a call in the next 3 minutes," Ronald said, checking his Patek Philippe, "my security team will assume I've been kidnapped. They will bypass the Chicago PD and call the FBI. Do you want the FBI here, Kowalski?" Kowalski hesitated, then unlocked the property bag. He slid Ronald's cracked iPhone through the bars. Ronald didn't call a lawyer. He didn't call his mother. He tapped a contact labeled Marcus, COO. He put the phone to his ear. It rang once. "Jules?" Marcus's voice was tense. "Where are you? We're seeing weird chatter on social media. Are you okay?" "I'm in a holding cell at O'Hare," Ronald said. "AeroVantage assault staff beat me and dragged me off Flight 402. "Jesus Christ, I'm sending legal. I'm sending everyone." "No," Ronald interrupted. "Legal takes too long. I want to hurt them, Marcus. I want to hurt them now. What do you want to do?" Ronald looked directly at Kowalski as he spoke. "Review our contract with AeroVantage, specifically the clause regarding client conduct and safety of vendor personnel. Subsection 4, paragraph B." There was the sound of furious typing on the other end. "Okay, I have it. If the client or its agents physically endanger Vertex executives or staff, Vertex reserves the right to immediately suspend all services pending a safety review." "Execute it," Ronald said. "Jules," Marcus paused. "If we do that, their entire fleet is grounded. They won't be able to check in a bag, let alone fly a plane. It's the nuclear option. The stock will crash." "They drew first blood," Ronald said, touching his swollen lip. "Execute Protocol 0. Revoke their license keys. Shut them down." "Copy that. Initiating lockout in 3, 2, 1. Ronald hung up and slid the phone back through the bars. "What did you just do?" Kowalski asked, his face sweating. Ronald sat back down on the steel bench and closed his eyes. "I just turned off the airline." Richard Sterling, the CEO of AeroVantage, was enjoying a dry-aged ribeye at a steakhouse in downtown Dallas. He was in a good mood. The quarter's numbers were up, fuel costs were down, and the stock was hovering at an all-time high of $48 a share. His phone buzzed, It was Sarah, his VP of PR. "Richard, we have a situation," she said. "A passenger removal in Chicago. It's trending." Richard rolled his eyes. "Send the standard apology. Offer him a travel voucher. $500. Usually shuts them up." "Richard, it's bad. You need to see the video. And we don't know who the guy is yet, but—" "Handle it, Sarah. I'm eating." He hung up. 10 minutes later, his phone rang again. This time, it was Bill Henderson, the Chief Information Officer, CIO. Bill never called at night. "Richard," Bill's voice was high-pitched, bordering on panic. "We have a catastrophic failure." "What kind of failure? Did a server crash?" "Everything," Bill stammered. "The check-in kiosks just went black in London, Tokyo, and New York. The pilots' iPads are bricked. They can't access flight plans or weather data. The website is displaying a 403 forbidden error. We are dark, Richard. The entire airline is dead in the water." Richard dropped his fork. "Is it a cyber attack? Russians?" "No," Bill said. "It's the license. Our enterprise keys for the Vertex cloud have been revoked. We're locked out." "Vertex?" Richard frowned. "Why would they do that? We pay them $200 million a year." "I called their support line," Bill said, "and I got an automated message. It says, 'Service suspended due to violation of Safety Clause 4B. Physical assault of executive personnel.'" Richard felt the blood drain from his face. The steak in his stomach turned to lead. "Physical assault of executive personnel?" He thought back to Sarah's call, the passenger removal, the man in the hoodie. "Bill," Richard whispered, "find out who was dragged off Flight 402 in Chicago tonight. Hold on, I'm looking at the manifest on my backup drive. Seat 3A. Name is... Oh my God. Who is it, Bill?" "It's Ronald Thorne, the CEO of Vertex." Richard Sterling stood up so fast his chair toppled over, crashing onto the expensive floor of the restaurant. The diners fell silent. "We beat up our IT provider," Richard screamed, not caring who heard him. "We dragged the guy who owns our servers off the plane?" "It gets worse," Bill said. "The markets in Asia just opened. Our stock is in free fall. The news broke that the fleet is grounded indefinitely. We've lost 12% in 10 minutes. Richard ran out of the restaurant, leaving his credit card on the table. The chaos was instantaneous. At gate K12, where Flight 402 had just pushed back, the plane stopped abruptly on the tarmac. The pilot's voice crackled over the radio, confused. "Tower, AeroVantage 402. My navigation computer just went blank. I have 0 data. Requesting tow back to gate." Inside the terminal, the scene was apocalyptic. Every screen above every AeroVantage desk flickered and went black, replaced by a single line of white text: "License revoked." Passengers who were scanning their boarding passes found the gates locked shut. The app on their phones logged them out. Thousands of people, confused and angry, surged toward the counters. But the agents couldn't help. Their computers were dead. Behind the desk, Greg, the gate agent who had sneered at Ronald, was frantically tapping his keyboard. Come on, what is this?" His manager ran over, holding a walkie-talkie. "Greg, stop! The system didn't crash. They cut us off." "Who?" "Vertex, the company that runs the software." Greg looked out the window. Flight 402 was being towed back. He looked at the angry mob of passengers. Then he looked at his phone. The video of him pointing at Ronald and laughing was playing on CNN on the overhead monitors. The headline read, "Billionaire CEO assaulted by airline staff, retaliates by shutting down global fleet." Greg felt his knees give way. The door to the precinct flew open. It wasn't a lawyer. It was the station commander, a heavy-set man named Captain O'Malley. Behind him were 2 men in suits who looked like FBI agents. O'Malley looked at Kowalski, his face purple with rage. "You idiot! You absolute, colossal idiot! Cap, Shut up!" O'Malley roared. "Do you know who you have in there? The governor just called me. The mayor just called me. The CEO of AeroVantage is on line 1 crying." O'Malley rushed to the cell door. "Mr. Thorne, I am so sorry. There has been a terrible misunderstanding. We are releasing you immediately. No charges. We'll drive you anywhere you want to go." The officer unlocked the door with trembling hands. Ronald stepped out. He was still wearing the dirty hoodie. His lip was still swollen. He looked at the terrified police officers, then at the FBI agents. "I don't need a ride," Ronald said calmly. "My jet is fixed. It's landing in 30 minutes. He turned to Captain O'Malley. "But I want the names of these 2 officers and the airline staff for the civil suit, and I want my phone back." Kowalski handed him the phone. Ronald checked the screen. AeroVantage stock, Aero, $14.20, 70%. The company had lost $35 billion in market cap in under an hour, and the bleeding had only just begun. Ronald typed a text to his mother. "Coming home, Mum. A little delayed. Taking the jet." He walked out of the police station into the flashing lights of 100 paparazzi cameras. The war had started, and Ronald Thorne had just dropped the first bomb. The next morning, 8 a.m., the sun rose over a different world for AeroVantage Airlines. Usually the morning news cycle moves on quickly, but not this time. The image of Ronald Thorne, a self-made black billionaire, being dragged like a sack of potatoes by a sneering gate agent and a burly cop, had touched a nerve that vibrated across the entire planet. But the real story wasn't just the assault. It was the retaliation. AeroVantage's entire fleet of 900 aircraft was still grounded. Airports from Dubai to Denver were refugee camps of stranded passengers. The airline was losing an estimated $20 million per hour in revenue, not counting the compensation claims that were piling up like snowdrifts. Richard Sterling hadn't slept. His tie was undone, his eyes red. He was staring at a monitor that showed the company's stock price. Aero, AO50, 82%. $52 billion of value had evaporated overnight. "He won't take my calls," Richard croaked. "I've called his office, his cell, his lawyer. I even called his mother in Atlanta." Nothing. His general counsel, a sharp woman named Eleanor, paced the room. "Richard, he's not going to answer. He's holding us hostage. Every minute the system is down, we bleed to death. We need to go public. You need to apologize, and we need to offer up a sacrifice." "The employees? Greg the gate agent, Becky the flight attendant, and the captain," Elena said ruthlessly. "They have to go. Publicly. Immediate termination. No severance. We need to show the world we are purging the rot." Richard nodded. "Do it. Issue the press release." At O'Hare, Greg didn't get a phone call. He found out he was fired when his badge stopped working at the employee turnstile. A security guard, a man Greg had ignored for years, walked up to him. "Hand over the badge, Greg," the guard said, smiling slightly. "Management sent an email. You're done." "You can't do this," Greg shouted, his face red. "I was following protocol. The computer told me to remove him." "The computer you work for is owned by the guy you assaulted," the guard said dryly. "And hey, there's a news crew outside waiting for you. Good luck." Greg walked out of the terminal into a wall of flashbulbs. He tried to cover his face, but it was too late. The internet had already found his Facebook page, his high school yearbook photos, everything. He wasn't just unemployed, he was radioactive. He would never work in aviation again. Becky fared no better. She was pulled off her return flight in Dallas and escorted out of the airport by airport police for her own safety. Her tearful video apology on TikTok, "I was just doing my job," was mocked mercilessly and ratioed into oblivion. But firing the staff didn't bring the servers back online. At noon, Richard Sterling stood before a podium in Atlanta, the hub of AeroVantage. He looked contrite. He looked humble. "We failed," Richard began, reading from the teleprompter. "What happened to Mr. Thorne was inexcusable. We have terminated the employees involved. We are reviewing all policies. We are prepared to offer Mr. Thorne a seat on our board of directors and a donation of $10 million to a charity of his choice." He paused for effect. However, Richard shifted gears, trying to garner sympathy. "Mr. Thorne's decision to shut down our airline is hurting innocent families. It is hurting Grandma who wants to see her grandkids. It is hurting the business traveler trying to get home. We ask Mr. Thorne, please, turn the lights back on. Let's talk." It was a good speech. It might have worked in 1995. But at 12:05 p.m., Ronald Thorne tweeted for the first time in 3 years. He posted a single image, a screenshot of the AeroVantage contract of carriage, the legal document passengers agree to when they buy a ticket. He had highlighted a specific section. The airline reserves the right to refuse service to anyone at any time without explanation. Ronald added a caption. "I reserved my right to refuse service. See you in court." The internet exploded. The charity donation offer was laughed at. $10 million? Ronald Thorne made $10 million while he brushed his teeth. Richard Sterling watched the tweet go viral in real time. He slumped against the podium. "He's not going to settle," Richard whispered to Elena. "He wants to kill us." By the morning of the 4th day, AeroVantage Airlines was no longer a company. It was a crime scene. The global headquarters in Dallas, usually a buzzing hive of logistical precision, had descended into a funeral silence. The only sound was the shredding of paper and the low murmur of bankruptcy lawyers conferring in the hallways. Richard Sterling sat in his corner office, a room that had once felt like a fortress, but now felt like a cage. He hadn't shaved in 72 hours. His tie lay on the floor. On the wall, a bank of monitors displayed the vital signs of his dying empire. Aero, 385, 92%. The stock had crashed so hard it had triggered multiple circuit breakers on the NYSE, halting trading 3 times in 2 days. $52 billion of market capitalization had evaporated into the ether. It was the fastest corporate collapse in aviation history. The board of directors had been blowing up Richard's phone since dawn. They were panicked. They were talking about liquidation. They were talking about prison. "He has to settle," Richard muttered to himself, spinning a pen between his fingers until it snapped. "He's a businessman. He understands leverage. We just need to offer him a number that makes him blink." His intercom buzzed. It was his assistant, her voice trembling. "Mr. Sterling, it's Vertex Systems on line 1. They say it's urgent." Richard lunged for the phone. "This is Sterling." "Mr. Sterling." The voice on the other end was not Ronald Thorne. It was Marcus, the COO. His tone was icy, stripped of any professional pleasantries. "Mr. Thorne is ready to terminate the standoff." Relief washed over Richard so intensely he almost wept. "Thank God." "Marcus, listen. Tell him we're ready. We'll issue a joint statement. We'll unblock the servers. Just tell me where to send the lawyers." "No lawyers," Marcus interrupted. "Mr. Thorne is currently in Atlanta, overseeing his father's care. He has booked the boardroom at the St. Regis Hotel in Buckhead for 2 p.m. He expects you, your CFO, and your chairman of the board to be there." "Atlanta? That's in 3 hours. We can't, if you aren't there at 2 p.m., Marcus said. "We will release the remaining server logs to the FBI. The ones that show how your gate agents manually overrode the random selection algorithm to target minority passengers. The line went dead. Richard stared at the receiver. The blood drained from his face. They had the logs. They had everything. "Get the jet," Richard screamed at his closed door. "Get the jet ready now." The St. Regis Atlanta is a place of old-world luxury, smelling of mahogany and fresh orchids. But as Richard Sterling and his entourage of 6 executives marched toward the conference suite, it felt like walking to the gallows. They entered the room at 1:58 p.m. It was a cavernous space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the humid, sprawling skyline of Atlanta. At the head of the long oak table sat Ronald Thorne. He looked nothing like the man in the viral video. The grey hoodie was gone. The sweatpants were gone. Ronald was wearing a navy bespoke suit that fit him like armor. A Patek Philippe glinted on his wrist. The only remnant of the assault was a darkening bruise on his lower lip and a small cut above his eyebrow. He didn't stand. He didn't smile. He was reading a file, and he didn't even look up as the most powerful men in the airline industry filed in like naughty schoolboys. "Sit," Ronald said. It wasn't an invitation. It was a command. Richard Sterling took the seat at the opposite end of the table. He tried to project confidence, but he was sweating through his shirt. "Mr. Thorne," Richard began, opening his leather folio. "First, let me express my deepest personal apologies for the incident. We have taken drastic steps. The employees involved have been terminated. We are retraining our entire staff." Ronald slowly closed his file. He looked down the length of the table, his eyes locking onto Richard's. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You fired a gate agent and a flight attendant," Ronald said, his voice deceptively soft. "You cut off the lizard's tail. But the lizard is still alive. We are prepared to offer you a settlement," Richard rushed on, desperate to regain control. "We have authorized a payment of $150 million. Tax-free, wired to any account in the world. All we ask is that you restore our license keys and sign a non-disparagement agreement." Ronald laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. $150 million, Ronald repeated. "That's a lot of money, Richard, to most people." He tapped his finger on the table. "But here is my problem. You dragged me off a plane I paid to be on. You humiliated me in front of the world. And you did it because your algorithm decided I was the path of least resistance. You thought I was cheap cargo." "It was a mistake," the chairman of the board blurted out. "It was a calculation," Ronald corrected sharply. "And your math was wrong." Ronald reached under the table and pulled out a thick document binder. He slid it across the mahogany surface. It spun smoothly, stopping inches from Richard's hand. "For the last 4 days," Ronald said, leaning back in his chair, "while you were panic-calling your PR team, I was on the phone with my bankers. You see, when a company loses 90% of its value in 72 hours, it creates an opportunity." Richard frowned. He looked at the binder. He looked at Ronald. "What is this?" "Open it." Richard flipped the cover open. It was an SEC filing, Form 13D, Beneficial Ownership Report, Issuer, Aero Vantage Holdings. Reporting person, Ronald Thorne, Vertex Capital Group. Richard's eyes scanned down to the bottom line. His breath hitched in his throat. Aggregate amount, beneficially owned, 51.4%. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy, suffocating, and terrifying. "You," Richard whispered. "You bought the stock?" "I bought it all," Ronald said casually. "I bought the dip. At $4 a share, your airline was cheaper than the servers I sell you. I used shell companies in Singapore, hedge funds in London, and private equity in New York. But as of this morning, I consolidated the positions." Ronald stood up. He walked slowly around the table. The floorboards creaked under his shoes. I don't want your settlement, Richard. I don't want your money. I own your money. I own the planes, I own the peanuts, I own the logo on the tail." He stopped directly behind Richard's chair. He leaned down, his voice a whisper that carried to every corner of the room. "And most importantly, I own you." Richard Sterling felt like he was going to vomit. He looked at his chairman, but the man was staring at the table, pale as a sheet. They all knew what this meant. This wasn't a negotiation. It was an execution. "So," Ronald said, walking back to the head of the table, "here is how this is going to work. I have prepared resignation letters for every single person in this room." "You can't do this," the CFO stammered. "We have contracts. We have golden parachutes." "Clause 4B, Ronald smiled. "Gross misconduct. By failing to secure the vendor relationship with Vertex and causing the stock to crash, you violated your fiduciary duty to the shareholders, which primarily is now me. I am cancelling your severance packages for cause. You are leaving with nothing." "I'll sue you," Richard screamed, standing up. "I built this company." "Sit down," Ronald roared. The shout was so sudden and powerful that Richard actually fell back into his chair. "You built a machine that treats people like garbage," Ronald said, his voice dropping back to a lethal calm. "And now I'm going to dismantle it." He tossed a stack of pens onto the table. "Sign the papers, then get out of my building. If you aren't gone in 10 minutes, I'm having security, real security, not the thugs you hire, escort you out for trespassing." One by one, the defeated executives reached for the pens. The scratching of ink on paper was the sound of an era ending. Richard Sterling was the last to sign. He looked at Ronald one last time. He saw no mercy in the younger man's eyes. He only saw the cold, hard reality of karma. Richard signed. As the disgraced board members shuffled out of the room, broken and jobless, Marcus walked in from the side door. He was holding a tablet. "They signed?" Marcus asked. "They signed," Ronald said, looking out the window at the Atlanta skyline. "So, boss," Marcus said, scrolling through the data. "We own an airline. The fleet is grounded. The brand is toxic. The stock is junk. Do we sell it for scrap?" Ronald thought about his father in the hospital room a few miles away. He thought about the indignity of that walk down the aisle. "No," Ronald said. "We don't scrap it. We fix it." "We're going to run an airline?" Marcus looked skeptical. "We're going to run the only airline," Ronald corrected. "The only one that treats a ticket like a contract and a passenger like a human being." "We'll need a new name," Marcus noted. "Aerovantage is dead." Ronald touched the bruise on his lip. It still hurt, but the pain felt different now. It felt like fuel. "Fair air," Ronald said. "Call the engineers, Marcus. Turn the servers back on. Let's get these people home." 6 months later, the transformation of Terminal 3 at O'Hare International Airport was not just architectural, it was atmospheric. For decades, this terminal had been a place of high blood pressure, sweaty palms, and the distinct, acrid scent of anxiety. It was where Airovantage had reigned, a kingdom built on the philosophy that passengers were self-loading cargo. But today, the peeling, aggressive blue paint was gone. The cramped, corral-like queuing lanes were gone. In their place was a calm, matte slate-grey aesthetic, punctuated by warm wood accents and soft ambient lighting. The signage was minimalist but clear. Above the main concourse, the massive LCD screen that used to flash delayed flight warnings in jarring red now displayed a simple, rotating message in soft white. "Fair air. Respect is our currency." The change wasn't just in the font, it was in the air. The silence was the first thing people noticed. The frantic shouting of gate agents, "Zone 4, get back! I said Zone 4 only," was absent. Instead, Fair Air agents moved through the crowd with tablets, checking people in before they even reached the desk. They weren't guarding the gate. They were facilitating the journey. In the middle of this utopian efficiency stood a man who looked like a ghost from a forgotten era. Richard Sterling, the former CEO of AeroVantage, shuffled forward in the general boarding lane. He was holding a plastic bin containing his shoes, his belt, and a cheap laptop. He wore a suit that was 2 years old, one he used to wear for casual Fridays, which now pulled slightly tight at the waist. He wasn't flying private. He wasn't even flying first class. His golden parachute had been shredded by Ronald Thorne's lawyers, his stock options voided by the gross negligence clauses he had once approved to keep his own underlings in check. Richard was currently flying to Cleveland for a second-round interview as a mid-level logistics manager for a regional trucking supply chain. The salary was $65,000 a year. It was less than he used to spend on wine annually. "Laptop out, shoes off," a TSA agent droned. Richard fumbled with his bag. His hands shook slightly. He looked up at the monitors hanging above the security checkpoint. They were tuned to CNBC, the channel that used to interview him. Now, they were talking about someone else. "The turnaround is unprecedented, Jim," an analyst was saying, his voice animated. "When Ronald Thorne bought the airline, we called it a vanity project. We said you can't monetize dignity. We were wrong. Fair Air just posted its second quarter earnings. They're up 40%. Thorne cut the middle management bloat, eliminated overbooking entirely, and instituted a passenger bill of rights that's legally binding. He didn't just fix the airline, he broke the industry model." Richard stared at the screen. He saw a clip of Ronald Thorne walking through the new terminal in Atlanta. Ronald didn't look like a tech billionaire playing dress-up. He looked like a statesman. He stopped to shake hands with a baggage handler, and Richard knew, with a sickening lurch in his gut, that it wasn't a photo op. Ronald actually knew the man's name. "Hey, buddy, are you moving or what?" The voice snapped Richard back to reality. The passenger behind him, a college student with a heavy backpack, was glaring at him. "Sorry," Richard mumbled. "Just watching the news." "Yeah, well, watch it on your phone. Move." Richard pushed his bin onto the conveyor belt. He walked through the scanner, holding his pants up, because he'd forgotten that without his belt, they were loose. He felt small. He felt invisible. For 20 years he had been a titan of industry. He had looked at passengers as numbers on a spreadsheet. Now, as he scrambled to tie his shoes on a dirty bench while people rushed past him, Richard Sterling realized the terrifying truth. He was just a number now, and it was a very small number. While Richard was putting his belt back on in Chicago, Ronald Thorne was in a quiet room on the 4th floor of Emory University Hospital in Atlanta. The blinds were drawn against the harsh afternoon sun, casting the room in a twilight glow. The only sounds were the rhythmic whoosh hiss of an oxygen machine and the steady beep of a heart monitor. Ronald sat in a plastic chair that was too small for his frame. He had spent the last 6 months in boardrooms, firing executives, rewriting corporate bylaws and negotiating with unions. He had fought a war on Wall Street and won. But here, in this room, none of that power mattered. His father, Elijah Thorne, lay in the bed. The cancer, which had been a slow-moving storm for years, had finally made landfall. Elijah was thin, his skin papery and translucent, but his eyes, the same deep, observant eyes that Ronald had inherited, were wide open. "Read it again," Elijah whispered. His voice was like dry leaves scraping together. Ronald smiled, a sad, tired expression. He picked up the tablet from the bedside table. It wasn't a profit report. It was a customer email. Dear Mr. Thorne, Ronald read softly. I'm a teacher from Detroit. Last week, I was flying home to see my sister, who was in emergency surgery. I was late to the gate. Under the old Airline, I would have been left behind. But your gate agent, a woman named Sarah, saw me running. She didn't close the door. She called the bridge back. She said, "We don't leave people behind." I made it to the hospital in time to say goodbye. Thank you for treating us like humans. Ronald put the tablet down. He looked at his father. Elijah was smiling. It was a weak smile, but it reached his eyes. That's better than the stock price, Jules, Elijah rasped. The board hates it, Ronald chuckled softly. They say I'm over-servicing the economy passengers. They want me to charge for the extra kindness. Let them hate it, Elijah said. He reached out a trembling hand. Ronald took it immediately, engulfing his father's frail fingers in his own strong grip. Do you remember, Elijah said, his breath hitching, the gift shop? In D.C.? Ronald nodded. He couldn't forget. He was 7 years old. They had gone on a class trip to the capital. Elijah had been a chaperone. They had walked into a high-end souvenir store, and the manager had shadowed them, watching Elijah's hands, watching Ronald's pockets. The manager had eventually asked them to leave, claiming they were loitering, even though Elijah had money in his hand to buy Ronald a model airplane. I was so angry, Ronald whispered. I wanted to break something. I know, Elijah said. I saw the fire in you. It scared me, Jules. Fire burns everything down if you don't control it. I told you then, don't burn the building down. Buy the building. And evict the landlord, Ronald finished the old mantra. You did good, son, Elijah said. His eyes were starting to drift, the medication pulling him under. You didn't just get rich. Any fool can get rich. You got even. But you did it by making things better. That's the real trick. I'm tired, Pop, Ronald admitted, dropping his head onto the mattress near his father's hand. It's hard work, trying to be decent in an indecent industry. Rest now, Elijah whispered. The flight is over. You landed the plane, son. You landed it. Elijah Thorne passed away 3 days later, in his sleep. He left behind a 1998 Ford F-150, a collection of jazz records, and a son who had reshaped the global aviation industry in his image. 2 weeks after the funeral, Ronald was back at O'Hare. He didn't take the private jet. He needed to make the trip properly. He needed to close the circle. He walked to gate K-12, the same gate. The scene was unrecognizable from that night 6 months ago. There were no shouting matches. There were no police officers looming by the podium. The gate agent was a young woman named Clara, wearing the sharp new charcoal uniform of Fair Air. She smiled as he approached. She didn't recognize him. Ronald was wearing a black hoodie, a new one, but the same style, and jeans. He looked like any other passenger. Boarding pass, please? She asked pleasantly. Ronald scanned his phone. Mr. Thorne, she said. Seat 3A. You're all set. Have a wonderful flight. Thank you, Clara, Ronald said. He walked down the jet bridge. The cold Chicago air smelled the same, jet fuel and damp concrete. But the dread was gone. He stepped onto the plane. The cabin had been retrofitted. The beige leather that he had bled on was gone. The seats were now a deep navy blue with memory foam cushioning. The lighting was a calming violet. Ronald walked to row 3. He stopped. For a second, a phantom memory flickered. The sight of Kowalski grabbing his arm, the taste of copper in his mouth, the humiliation of being dragged down this very aisle while people filmed him. He took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the new cabin, clean, fresh, smelling of lemon and sanitized air. He sat down in seat 3A. Good evening, sir, a flight attendant appeared. It was a man this time, tall and professional. "My name is David. Can I get you a beverage before takeoff?" Ronald looked at David. He looked for the stress, the exhaustion, the forced smile that Becky had worn that night. He didn't see it. He saw a man who was paid 40% above the industry average, who had full benefits, and who knew his CEO had his back. "Just water, please," Ronald said. "Sparkling or still?" "Still." Ronald settled back into the seat. He buckled the belt. It clicked with a satisfying, solid sound. The plane began to push back. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm, authoritative, and friendly. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Fair Air Flight 402 to Atlanta. We're pushing back right on time. We have a smooth ride ahead of us. Sit back, relax, and thank you for choosing to fly with us. We know you have a choice, and we're honored you picked Fair Air." Ronald turned his head to the window. He watched the runway lights blur into streaks of amber and white as the plane accelerated. The engines roared, a sound not of struggle but of power. He felt the lift, the moment gravity let go. As the plane climbed into the darkness above Chicago, banking south toward Atlanta, toward home, Ronald pulled his phone out. He opened his photo gallery and looked at the last picture he had taken of his father. "We're wheels up, Pop," Ronald whispered to the empty seat beside him. He turned off the screen, closed his eyes, and for the first time in 6 months, he slept without dreaming. The turbulence was over. And that is how one man turned a moment of ultimate disrespect into a $52 billion lesson. Aerovantage thought they were just dragging a nobody off a plane to save a few bucks. They didn't realize they were dragging the architect of their own destruction. It's a brutal reminder that in the modern world, power isn't just about who has the badge or the uniform. It's about leverage. Ronald Thorne didn't get mad. He got ownership. He showed us that the best revenge isn't screaming. It's rewriting the rules of the game so you always win. So here's the question for you guys. If you had Ronald Thorne's money and power, would you have just sued them and taken the cash? Or would you have gone nuclear option and bought the whole airline just to fire the people who disrespected you? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of high-stakes revenge and corporate karma, make sure you smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. I'll see you in the next video. Stay safe and fly smart.